Hello and welcome back to the Generative Landscape discussion series. Today we're joined by Teodora Szasz, if I'm pronouncing that right, who is a computational scientist at the University of Chicago. So Teodora, so nice to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me here.
Yeah, such a
It's a
pleasure.
pleasure.
Excellent. So maybe before we start talking about, your recent work and things, just to give people a bit of an idea of where you're coming from, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into working with machine learning and AI, what brought you here and what you do.
Yes. So coming from Romania with a background in telecommunications and also multimedia technologies. I've done my PhD in ultrasound imaging in France. And since 6 years ago, I started working at the University of Chicago as a computational scientist, um, helping different researchers in university with different projects. Of course, I did not started this job with an AI background at all. So my background, as you can see, is from telecommunications to computer science and now beyond to AI. But yeah, a lot of all my projects right now are in the AI space.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, what really excited me when we were speaking before about your role and things is that it's this very like intersectional space. It's not like, oh, I did my undergrad and then my master's and PhD in some deep learning lab and now I do that research. So you're dealing with not just your own projects but also all of these other people who come to the computational scientist to say, I need help on this, that, or the other project. So maybe for a bit more grounding on that, if you want to just give like a very short like description of what are some of the things that people come to you for. If I come to you from the medical faculty or from a different space, who am I and what is my ask of you and your department when I knock on your door?
Yeah, and Jonathan, I think you hit it right there because I started as being very involved with the hospital at the university. So the, the the faculty there and radiologists were coming to me for the medical imaging experience I developed during my PhD. So at the beginning, they were saying, oh, how can we maybe align these images that are medical but are taken by different scanners or with different modalities. And that's what I've done a lot at the beginning. Right now, I'm not doing medical imaging at all, but I'm sure it's going to come back. So right now, I'm working with in a project with satellite images, looking at heritage improvement in Afghanistan area. And previously, I was working with just children's books, with looking at measuring representation in children's books. And I know you are smiling because that's one of the projects that probably got you got to your heart.
Yes, definitely planning to quiz you on that shortly. But maybe before we dive into that one, because that's one that I'm almost most excited about. But even with these others, it strikes me that you're probably one of the people who faces this difficulty constantly of trying to explain to people what's possible and what's not. Because these tools feel like magic. Someone might have come to you 10 years ago with a medical problem and you would say there's no way, whereas now that might be something that you can solve. So if someone comes, like say the satellite one, what is that discussion around saying what might be possible, what you're definitely sure is possible? How are you breaking down that project and communicating with someone who maybe doesn't have that same technical understanding?
Yeah, and I think that's already a skill in itself to be able to understand people in their domain of expertise. And when they came to you, they come with the story and with their domain. And many words are very, I have to go and search for them in dictionary because they will mention words from their domain of expertise, in the satellite imagery, this project is with archaeologists, so they will mention different names of sites that I never heard about, and I had to get familiar with them and even pronounce those names very well. But then what's interesting to me is, and I think another skill is on how do we ask the questions that are relevant to them, and not as let me solve this problem for you, but it's really how can I support in a way that's the most beneficial for them. For example, the actual story was this project was basically funded for 5 years, and in the 4th year they came to me in a kind of emergency situation, and they were, well, we have been doing this manually, like going in the location, even traveling to that area looking for these sites, and we only covered 50% of the country. Can you do it in 1 year, the other 50% with this AI magic? And it sounds very intimidating at the beginning. And then you have to very quickly go into, well, how do you do it right now? And see that, okay, they look at maps and different imageries. And so that's now data talk. And then really understanding the way they do it, I feel it's very important, because that's how you can get very close to them and understand the process and automatize that somehow with computer science or with this AI techniques. But of course, as probably everyone knows now, it's data is very important, and most of the time is we spend on making sure that this data exists and we gathered it, but also it's very accurate in their side, that whatever they provide is standardized and normalized and makes sense to computers.
Right. Yeah, I mean that is such a skill, and it sounds like you've got it. I know it's very easy as the computer scientist to always come in and say, I bet I can solve this problem, and leap in and start doing things. And I know from past experience that domain knowledge, if you don't have it, can really bite you, because you might do your whole thing on satellite imagery and and it turns out you've been using the month of October, and the tree that you're interested in is only green in August. So all of these little things that might come in where that, like you said, first looking at them, how are they doing it, getting their, picking their brains, and then starting to bring the discussion across into, okay, where can AI start to play a part? Great. Well, okay.
Yeah, it's really it's really being curious about what they're doing, and having that patience of listening and understanding that it's, I think, crucial.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, in that case, without any further delaying, I can't wait to talk about this other project that you mentioned. So maybe as another case study or example of that kind of interplay and thinking, could you talk just a little bit about what this children's book representation project was, how that started, and again, what are those questions that you're asking as you come together with the rest of the team to say, what can AI do, what is everyone else doing, and what questions are we trying to solve?
Yeah, of course. So this it's very interesting and very close to my heart, this project on children's books. And the way it started was a faculty coming and asking for support. And she came with this, I remember, very many thousands of columns of spreadsheet where she and her researchers were going page by page. And my team looks at images. That's a bit even more interesting, that very often when we look at books, we think text, and less we think images, while for children's books makes sense. There are a lot of images and illustrations, and our books just images. And so they came, and basically they had for each image how many people were in, or characters, color of hair, age, gender, race, and actions, and so many more. And they have done that for maybe, I don't know, let's say 500 characters. And they found it very tedious, and they found that, well, that's going to take them a lot of time, because we are going to have about more than 1,000 books initially to analyze. So that's where I was looking at what they've done, and it was a very, very good beginning. But then I was immediately looking at, there should be there already some state-of-the-art tools that could process these pages very, very quickly. And my first reaction was looking into some of the industry tools, APIs, and we were looking at Google Vision API, where they have a demo where you upload an image and it gives you certain labels about that image. And that was already very interesting. So I was showing that to the PI and say, hey, well, this is probably how we can start. But then also we find very useful to talk to this faculty and somehow guide them to focus on just certain things that are super important for them to see about these characters initially. So then we prioritized what's the most important aspect. Is this probably the three critical ones, and another one that she was very, very active looking into was the skin color. So, and that's how then we went into, okay, now the labeling can become a little bit easier. We start detecting faces, but even the face detection, I was surprised, because I was like, well, we have so many tools nowadays in AI, and face recognition, face detection is something that we have done for human a lot. So it should be easy for children's books, where it's just a sketch. And then I realized that out-of-shelf methods do not perform well on illustration and drawings of faces. So then we went a step back and we start getting training data sets and training models for detecting faces in these books more accurately. So it's a bit of the process of jumping into, can we try something and fail fast? And then little by little, now going step back, step forward, and see how things are working, training models. And right now we are in the step where we would like to combine text and images, and yeah, it's very interesting. And one thing that's impressive is that I don't know, maybe because it's in the academic setting, I do have a lot of guidance and a lot of free will to create tools and to go in directions that maybe we haven't imagined at the beginning. And one of the direction is that we were talking last time was that maybe let's use this new AI tools that can draw illustrations.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. I really like what you were saying
I'm
about.
sorry.
No. I mean, you're giving me so much good stuff. This is like exactly what we want. So I'm thinking like takeaways for people. One of the big things that you mentioned was like getting something working early, right? Having that initial test, even if you don't, the off-the-shelf tools turns out don't work quite well enough, but having that starting point where everybody involved can see kind of what it's doing, where you're going, that helps inform that future direction. And so I really like that as an approach versus, again, someone who's just done deep learning the whole time, maybe like, here's the problem statement and straight away is starting to code their own, neural network from scratch. And you think, okay, pause on that just for a bit, because that first step is going to reveal so much about what the real problems are, what the questions you need to be looking at first are. So I really like that component. I'm excited to talk a little bit.
And
oh, yeah?
so sorry, I'm just wanting to make the distinction. I think here comes the distinction of applied AI versus just AI research. Often in academia, we want to go and develop. we still have this PhD mindset where, oh, we want to develop something original and new, and oh, this is new. But I think, and computer scientists have a lot of that mindset because we think our domain it's the most important. But in my case, I'm only developing tools. So if something manual can do a better job that something with AI that we develop, the domain expert will choose the manual thing. So it's what I call myself, I'm the water guy. And that's an analogy to, the Star Trek and Star Wars, where they use this very fancy computer graphics methods to render water, or I don't know. But for actors, that doesn't matter. For directors, it doesn't matter that, the water is something that you splash with real water, or you generate something graphics. You are just a water guy. So that's where I am.
There we go. I like that. Very application focused.
I see it. I think it's, yes.
Okay, so before we talk about like the new tools being applied to this, maybe we should mention, so you did this analysis, you looked at these faces. What were the results? Like, what did you find in terms of how people are represented and who's getting the most time on the page and so on?
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. And one thing that I want to say is we looked at books that are in diversity collections, where basically they were produced to have more diversity, and also books that are award-winning books that every kid will probably see at one point. And of course, I mean, we've seen a lot, and we looked over time from 1920 to today. But now stereotypes that we are all very familiar with, that now a lot of white faces, and a lot of one interesting thing is when we were looking at Black children that were basically portrayed younger than the actual age that they are. So it becomes just interesting to see all these differences. And what we want to do, the ultimate goal is not to, many people confuse this with, you should have an index of diversity on each book. But we want to basically just inform people that are making the decisions on what's going in these books, or what's really going in the books, and have them take the decisions they want. So not quantify in any way the entire book.
Right. So you're not necessarily saying, this one's bad because it only has this type of character or anything. It's more just saying, let's let you know that, hey, by the way, this group of people might not have as many books that represent them. That might be a market segment you can address, or something that we can work towards fixing, but in a very kind of just overall descriptive way. Okay, so there's a few things that are of interest here
correct.
for the course and for people working with AI. One that's maybe somewhat obvious is that if it's the case that, say, white children are overly represented in children's books as of now, and especially historically, what that means for any artificial intelligence like generative models that are trained on existing literature is that they'll also tend to overproduce like that specific kind of illustration, right? So there's this feedback loop now. As all of these books become training data, those same differences in who's represented and who gets more time, those get now embodied into these models. And so that's like a downside to be aware of, is that, as is the case with the broader internet, the types of people who have lots of photographs, lots of glamour shots, lots of children's book illustrations, that's going to affect the kinds of images that you generate. And the reason why you're doing this work is because I think we're all aware that representation is actually important for you to identify with the character in the story, or feel like this is a story that, you know, might have come from your life. So that's an issue that this I think highlights quite nicely, is to say these books, like many other types of training data, currently have this kind of skew. And so any thoughts on that side of things?
Yeah, and I might have a bit gotten lost on the thread of so the question will be how the representation affects the future representation. Is that the question? One of the things I want to share is about the I hope everyone knows about this new tool, DALL-E, that generates images and based on a text, a prompt text. So one of the things that we are playing with that and see how this works in our setup. And what we have done was to provide a little face of to these tools, a face of one of the characters in the books, and see what the tool is filling this up to, using also a prompt. And we find out that all the images that were generated was of white people. We were prompting on children on the beach or something like that, while giving a little prompt of the image as well, of the face. And yeah, all the kids were all white skin, and we were just making the kind of conclusion then in this, if we follow DALL-E's rules, then maybe only white kids are allowed to be on the beach. But it's interesting to see those very clearly in our models, this representation or these biases that is very hard to tackle, because it's also very hard to quantify what goes into and how balanced the data is and all that. And when the models become so big, how do you know? I'm not sure if there is a way to really look at what's in that training data set. Yeah,
exactly. So I think we're at this really interesting point with these models where you have these potential issues, right? You have these things of like, okay, who's getting represented, who gets things, and so some people see it as very much a negative of, if we let these AIs as they are now just be the way that we generate content going forward, then that means you might even, you know, be in a worse situation, because now so you have that like dark future that people see of, oh, all these biases are going to be locked in forever. And then you have people saying, well, we should fight this by, you know, mandating that X% of your characters should be this, that, or the other, you know, this very draconian rule. But then there's the other side, which is, as we get more control over these tools, what you and I were sort of dreaming about is to say, well, you know, we can also move away from this idea that you have to choose one static character for your book, right? Whereas in the past you might say, who's my largest audience? Let me just market driven, push the blame onto something else like that. Now you have the potential to say, well, what if every child reading this can, take a selfie and then see themselves in the role, or just choose like a little character creator, and when you still have the artist overall, directing structure and layout and style and things like that, but with these, things like Dream Booth, which I'll link some examples down below for those who haven't seen it, ways of fine tuning these models on pictures of yourself or pictures of one specific character, and then being able to generate those in new situations. What I'm excited about is that maybe we move away from picking the largest audience or picking the child that you're familiar with towards this kind of very like personalized literature where suddenly my book can have any character in it. I don't have to enforce a particular race, a particular gender, and with these models it's able to be much more personalized, or generate 5 different versions and have a bit more diversity just through that. So I'm guessing that's something you're excited about as well, and it sounds like maybe even a direction that the project is starting to move.
Oh yes, it's something that I know when you and I talked first time, we were like, oh, how can we get started? And I think from like a more creative perspective, I would love to be able to go in that direction. I know that now from social sciences perspective and academic setting, probably we'll still have to look into measuring and analyzing what's existing now as well. But yeah, I'm very excited on getting to see how we can create. I think you got it right. Personalized experiences for kids where, I mean, we've done this with gaming a lot of, I can choose my own avatar and maybe I can choose now to be the policeman in the story and tomorrow to be the gardener or the school teacher or the, wherever, or just the girl that's by the beach. So I think that's it's definitely some direction that the child in me will love to go into.
Yeah, I think that's such an exciting direction, and I'm sure people who are taking this course will be very keen to dive in and maybe starting to think, oh, I can write this and that model, and so maybe just to urge everyone who's watching, remember what we talked about before, speak to some actual people who are authors, or don't assume that you know everything there is to know about diversity in children's books. So have some of those caveats. Start with existing tools. See what InPainting or Dream Booths, these existing implementations can do before you go and try and code your own custom character creator. But with all of those lessons in mind, I think this would be a very fun thing to have the community working on and people brainstorming of, what does this look like now, and what does it look like as we go forward and these tools get better and better. Great. I think I'm slowly working through my list of things I wanted to ask you. The final few that I had, if you're okay for time, would be, well, number one, so when you started, you said that I think it was more like, traditional computational stuff, multiprocessing and that sort of thing on medical images, and you've transitioned through in terms of the kinds of requests to be very, AI focused, and at the moment that's detecting things in images and analyzing those. So what do you see like your role being, and similar roles being like in another 3 years, 5 years? Do you have an idea of the direction that things are going, and what a computational scientist at University of Chicago will be doing another 5 years from now?
That's very interesting, because I'm in my career right now in a point where I'm looking into creating an AI team that does. So there is a lot of demand on using these tools in different domains, from economics to, again, biology and so on. So there is still a lot of need of testing and trying these AI techniques on different domains. And I think, at least for the next next 2-3 years, that's going to be my focus on literally supporting more and more domains. I think it's still new, especially, I don't know if in industry, but in academia, to have this collaboration so strongly between data scientists and AI experts with the domain knowledge, and be more, even one of other passions I have is really democratizing AI for right now I'm focusing a lot on the public sectors, because I feel we can move world forward if we learn how to use AI in a responsible and, of course, way, and in a way that we can trust. Yeah, and then we'll see.
Then we'll see. So I know, so on that democratization front, I know you do a lot of like workshops and things as you try and push these skills out to other people. So I'm curious, what do you think is like the say I'm a scientist in the biology department or in the humanities faculty, and I'd like to sort of get a feel for this. What is your like first point of contact if you're doing a workshop for someone, or you're recommending them courses or approaches? What do you think are the skills that they need to start with to begin to get an understanding of what's possible and what they can do?
What's possible in AI? I think one of the things I always recommend is there must be some research or some work on using AI in that domain. For example, if I will be a doctor, I will go into, okay, what tool exists now for analyzing, I don't know, breast cancer or research? And then there are papers, and start looking into what's possible and what are the results. And maybe that's something that's very similar to your research, and that can be implemented or can be borrowed and applied to. I think that's. I think it's good to have some knowledge about AI if you are in another domain of expertise. But I think too much knowledge can be very, very, it's not too much knowledge. It's about the time you spending time in workshops and courses, and now understand how the math behind might be overwhelming. And that's where data scientists are for, to help you with that part while explaining how this tool work for your context. So I think it's just reading on really what's out there already for the whatever domain of expertise you are in.
Okay, perfect. So looking at what's being done, but then finding someone who's got their expertise to merge your domain expertise with to get that collaboration going forward. I really like that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Teodora. It's been so generous of you to share your time and your experience with us. That I've really enjoyed this chat. Are there any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we close?
Yeah, Jonathan, I just want to thank you for this wonderful, wonderful class that you put together. And, I borrowed a lot of materials from your class on creating my own workshops this summer for the university students here on generating art with AI. And I mean, for me, this is such a great the way you make people understand and you create these tools for people to start generating AI. I think we need more of those. And I don't know how can I support more, but I'm here to help in any way. Maybe we can, I don't know, generate art, but also illustrations and characters, and maybe, I don't know, we can generate other type of data as well. We'll see.
We'll see. Thank you so much for those kind words. And everybody, stay tuned, and we'll see what collaborations end up happening in the future. for now, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.